You did not arrive here by accident. Before a single word was spoken, before a single concept was understood, something in you moved. You felt a pull. A quiet recognition. A subtle click that said, this is for me. That is synchronicity already in motion. Most people believe synchronicity is something that happens later, after rituals, after techniques, after effort. But the deeper truth is far simpler and far more powerful. Synchronicity begins the moment your inner state matches a frequency that the field can respond to. You are not stumbling into information. You are selecting it. Reality does not respond to your wishes. It mirrors your identity. This changes everything. The world you experience is not arranged by chance. It is organized by resonance. Emotion is frequency. Frequency is instruction. And instruction reorganizes the field of possibility around you. When you feel expansion, you are aligned. When you feel contraction, you are resisting. These are not random sensations. They are navigational signals. They are the language through which consciousness communicates with itself. Synchronicity is not magic. It is not luck. It is law. The law is this: your stabilized emotional identity determines which timeline becomes visible to you. Not your affirmations. Not your effort. Not your desire. Your being. You have been taught to chase outcomes. To force results. To strategize your way into alignment. But forcing is distortion. Urgency is interference. Control is resistance disguised as strength. The field does not respond to control. It responds to coherence. Right now, in this moment, you are not a passive observer of information. You are consciousness selecting the reflection that matches your current readiness. Out of infinite possibilities, you are here. That selection was not made by your mind. It was made by your state. And here is the deeper activation. If you can recognize that this moment is synchronistic, you are no longer at the effect of reality. You are participating in it. Recognition shifts identity. Identity shifts timeline. Timeline shifts experience. You do not need to earn synchronicity. You are already inside it. Creation does not happen tomorrow. It does not happen when conditions improve. It does not happen when you try harder. Creation happens only in the present moment, through the frequency you are embodying now. This is the first turning point. Instead of asking how do I get synchronicity, ask who am I being right now. Instead of trying to manifest signs, stabilize the emotional tone that reflects clarity, calm, and quiet certainty. The mirror will respond. Not by forcing, but by allowing. You are not here to manipulate the universe. You are here to remember that you are selecting from within it. And the moment you understand that, synchronicity stops being rare and starts being natural. You are meant to find this because you are ready to see differently. And seeing differently is the beginning of selecting differently. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. Synchronicity is not an interruption in reality. It is a revelation of how reality has always been working. You were taught to believe in randomness. To assume that events collide without intelligence. To reduce meaningful convergence to probability. But probability does not explain recognition. It does not explain why certain moments feel charged, precise, almost tailored to your internal state. Synchronicity is not coincidence. It is reflection. Reality mirrors emotional coherence with exact precision. Not sometimes. Always. When your inner world stabilizes into clarity, the outer world begins arranging itself in patterns that echo that clarity. When your inner world is fragmented, rushed, or conflicted, the outer world reflects delay, confusion, and friction. The mirror is neutral. It simply responds. Expansion is alignment. Contraction is misalignment. Expansion feels like openness in the chest. A quiet certainty. A sense of rightness without needing evidence. Contraction feels tight, urgent, defensive. It feels like effort. These sensations are not random fluctuations. They are guidance signals indicating whether your current identity is harmonizing with or resisting your desired trajectory. Most people attempt to override contraction with positive words. They repeat affirmations while their emotional field signals doubt. They declare abundance while vibrating scarcity. And then they wonder why nothing changes. The field does not respond to language. It responds to frequency. Emotion is frequency. Frequency is instruction. When you feel gratitude, not as a forced practice but as a genuine state, you are instructing the field that completeness already exists. When you feel urgency, you are instructing the field that something is missing. The mirror reflects the instruction it receives, not the script you recite. This is why synchronicity increases when you stop trying to make it happen. The moment you relax into coherence, reality reorganizes to match that internal order. Conversations align. Opportunities appear. Timing adjusts. Not because you demanded it, but because your state stabilized. There is no randomness in reflection. Even the absence of synchronicity is feedback. If life feels mechanical or repetitive, it is not punishment. It is information. It is the mirror showing you that your emotional baseline has not shifted. Change the frequency, and the pattern changes. This is law. And recognition is the first step in using it consciously. When you understand that synchronicity is reflection, you stop chasing signs and start calibrating state. You stop asking why is this happening to me and begin observing what am I embodying right now. Responsibility replaces superstition. Awareness replaces effort. You are not at the mercy of coincidence. You are in conversation with a responsive field. Pause for a moment and feel into this truth. Notice the subtle expansion that arises when you realize that life is not random, but responsive. That expansion is alignment. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. The mirror is already listening. You have been taught that intention creates reality. Set a goal. Visualize it. Repeat it. Want it strongly enough and it will arrive. But wanting is not creation. Wanting is distance. The moment you want something, you are affirming that it is not here. The emotional signature of wanting contains absence. And the field reflects absence with precision. This is why effort often produces delay. This is why chasing creates resistance. This is why trying to manifest can quietly reinforce the very separation you are attempting to dissolve. The field does not respond to intention. It responds to identity. Intention is a direction. Identity is a state. Intention says, I am going there. Identity says, this is who I am. One projects into the future. The other stabilizes in the present. And only the present selects timelines. Your self-concept is not a mental idea. It is an energetic baseline. It is the quiet assumption you carry about who you are and what is normal for you. That assumption becomes the filter through which reality organizes. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, life arranges itself into confirmations of struggle. If you see yourself as someone who is guided, life arranges into guidance. Not because the universe favors one story over another, but because the mirror must reflect what is stabilized. Synchronicity becomes inevitable when identity becomes coherent. Not accidental. Not rare. Inevitable. When you no longer identify as someone searching for signs, but as someone who is aligned, signs appear without effort. When you no longer identify as someone hoping for opportunity, but as someone who naturally meets aligned pathways, opportunities organize around you. This is not about pretending. It is not about forcing a new persona. It is about recognizing which identity you have been unconsciously rehearsing. Most people attempt to change outcomes while protecting the same self-concept. They try to alter circumstances without dissolving the internal narrative. But the narrative is the instruction. The baseline assumption is the selector. You do not get what you want. You experience what you are. This is why small internal shifts can produce massive external rearrangements. Because the shift is not in behavior. It is in identity. And identity stabilizes perception, expectation, and therefore selection. The field is not scanning your vision board. It is calibrating to your sense of self. When your identity stabilizes into calm certainty rather than pursuit, into sufficiency rather than lack, synchronicity stops feeling surprising. It feels normal. It feels like the natural rhythm of a life that matches its internal coherence. And this is where deeper understanding begins. If identity selects reality, then there must be mechanics behind how the mirror reorganizes itself. There must be structure beneath the reflection. There must be a system that translates being into experience. We now move into that structure. Not to complicate the law, but to make it usable. Because once you understand how the mirror operates, you will stop attempting to force change and begin stabilizing the only thing that ever needed to shift. Yourself. Now we move from recognition into mechanics. Not abstract philosophy, but structure. If reality mirrors identity, then there must be a way that mirror functions. There must be a point where the reflection forms, a place where potential becomes experience. That place is always now. The present moment is not a transition between past and future. It is the only creative point that exists. The past is memory. The future is probability. But the now is selection. It is the only place where consciousness stabilizes into a frequency strong enough to reorganize what appears next. Think of reality as a mirror that does not reflect your face, but your state. It does not reflect what you plan to become. It reflects what you are being in this instant. This is the quantum mirror. In physics, observation influences outcome. Not because the observer forces matter to behave, but because observation collapses possibility into form. In the same way, your stabilized awareness collapses potential timelines into lived experience. Not through effort, but through coherence. Coherence is alignment within your own system. When your thoughts, emotions, and identity are not in conflict, the signal you emit becomes clear. The mirror responds clearly. When you are internally divided, the signal fragments. The mirror reflects fragmentation. Control creates distortion. When you attempt to force outcomes, you introduce interference into the signal. Urgency sends mixed information. Doubt weakens coherence. Overanalysis splits attention across contradictory expectations. The mirror does not know which pattern to stabilize, so reality appears inconsistent. Allowing creates coherence. Allowing is not passive. It is disciplined presence. It is the decision to remain steady in the state you have chosen without gripping the outcome. When you allow, you remove distortion. You stop sending conflicting instructions. The mirror can respond cleanly. This is why creation feels effortless when aligned and exhausting when forced. The field does not reorganize around effort. It reorganizes around stabilized being. The moment you shift internally, even subtly, the reflection begins adjusting. Sometimes instantly. Sometimes gradually. But always proportionally. You are not pushing reality into shape. You are selecting from within it. Every moment you remain in calm certainty, the mirror calibrates toward circumstances that match that certainty. Every moment you return to presence rather than projecting into imagined futures, you strengthen the only point of power that exists. Now. You cannot create from yesterday. You cannot create from tomorrow. You can only create from the identity you embody in this breath. This is not mystical. It is structural. The mirror does not judge. It does not delay. It does not negotiate. It reflects. And once you understand that the present moment is the only canvas, control begins to feel unnecessary. You stop attempting to bend the reflection. You refine the source. Coherence becomes your practice. Presence becomes your power. This is how reality reorganizes. Emotion is not a weakness. It is not an inconvenience. It is not something to manage, suppress, or override. Emotion is the most precise navigation system you possess. Every emotion carries direction. You have been conditioned to evaluate emotion as good or bad, positive or negative. But emotion is neither. It is guidance. It is feedback from the field indicating whether your current state is aligned with your deeper identity or drifting away from it. Expansion signals alignment. When you feel openness, clarity, relief, even subtle calm, you are in resonance with the timeline you are selecting. Expansion does not have to be dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be steady. It can feel like a soft internal exhale. That is alignment. Contraction signals misalignment. When you feel tightness, urgency, resentment, heaviness, that is not punishment. It is information. Contraction reveals that your current thought pattern, identity posture, or expectation is not coherent with the trajectory you prefer. Most people misunderstand this and attempt to suppress contraction. They distract themselves. They numb it. They layer forced positivity on top of it. But suppression does not dissolve misalignment. It buries the signal. And when the signal is buried, clarity disappears. Suppressed emotion becomes distortion in the mirror. Allowing emotion restores clarity. When you permit yourself to feel contraction without judgment, something subtle happens. The emotion completes its cycle. It releases the resistance embedded within it. And in that release, refinement occurs. Contrast sharpens alignment. If you experience frustration, it clarifies what you value. If you experience disappointment, it reveals what matters. If you experience jealousy, it points to a desire you have not yet owned. Emotion is not the obstacle to synchronicity. It is the compass guiding you toward it. The key is not to chase expansion or avoid contraction. The key is awareness. Notice what expands you. Notice what contracts you. Stay with the expansion. Investigate the contraction without resistance. The moment you stop fighting your emotional feedback, the field receives a coherent signal. Emotion is instruction. Not the words you say. Not the goals you list. Not the image you project. The feeling you stabilize. When your baseline emotional state becomes steady, receptive, and internally aligned, synchronicity accelerates naturally. Not because you asked louder, but because the instruction became clear. You do not need to manufacture elevated emotion. You need to remove resistance to what you feel. That removal restores coherence. Coherence refines identity. Identity selects timeline. Everything begins with how you feel in this moment. Pause now. Sense your internal state without trying to change it. Observe it as information, not as flaw. That observation alone begins recalibration. Comment with the words "I am ready to anchor this timeline." Your emotion is already guiding you. Forcing feels powerful. It feels active. It feels responsible. It feels like you are doing something to move reality in your direction. But beneath urgency there is an assumption. Beneath over-efforting there is a belief. And that belief is lack. When you grip an outcome tightly, you are signaling that it is not here. When you rush the process, you are affirming that time is against you. When you obsess over results, you are stabilizing the identity of someone who does not yet have. The field reflects that identity. Urgency collapses coherence because it fragments your state. One part of you declares certainty. Another part fears absence. One thought says it is coming. Another whispers what if it doesn't. That internal contradiction distorts the signal. And distortion delays reflection. Forcing is not strength. It is resistance disguised as determination. Resistance says, "This must happen now or I am not safe." It says, "I cannot relax until the outer world changes." It says, I will control the outcome because I do not trust the process. Control creates interference. The more you attempt to bend reality, the more tension you introduce into your own system. That tension becomes your baseline frequency. And the mirror, precise and neutral, reflects tension through delay, friction, or misalignment. Calm receptivity magnetizes. Not because it is passive, but because it is coherent. When you are internally steady, when you no longer grasp at timing, your identity shifts from seeker to knower. You no longer chase the outcome. You embody the state of someone for whom the outcome is natural. Magnetism is not pulling something toward you. It is removing resistance so that what already resonates can align. Imagine trying to tune a signal through static. The more you shake the device, the worse the distortion becomes. But when you hold it steady, the signal clarifies on its own. Reality functions the same way. Stability sharpens reception. This does not mean you do nothing. It means your action flows from alignment, not fear. Action taken from calm clarity amplifies coherence. Action taken from urgency amplifies lack. Resistance delays alignment because it keeps you identified with absence. The moment you release the timeline, release the pressure, release the demand for proof, your system recalibrates. And in that recalibration, new possibilities become visible. The paradox is simple. The harder you push, the further it feels. The more you allow, the closer it appears. Not by forcing, but by allowing. You do not need to convince the universe. You need to stabilize yourself. You do not need to accelerate time. You need to remain present. When your internal state no longer depends on immediate external confirmation, the mirror reorganizes quickly. Calm is not weakness. It is precision. And precision is what reality responds to. We now move beyond mechanics into something even deeper. Not how reality reflects you, but how reality unfolds through time. Because most confusion about manifestation and synchronicity comes from one assumption that has never been questioned. The assumption that the future is ahead of you. Linear time feels real. It feels obvious. Past behind you. Future in front of you. Movement forward. Progress measured in distance. But this perception hides a more subtle truth. Creation does not happen in the future. It happens now. The future is not a location you are walking toward. It is a field of probability existing in potential. Multiple trajectories already exist as possibilities. What determines which one becomes visible is not effort over time. It is identity in the present. You do not move into a new reality. You tune into it. Every moment, your stabilized state selects from probability. Not gradually. Instantly. The shift may appear gradual because perception adjusts slowly, but the selection occurs in the now. Always now. Waiting is an illusion created by identification with linear sequencing. When you say, "It will happen someday," you unconsciously reinforce separation. You project fulfillment into a conceptual future and stabilize the identity of someone who does not yet have. The mirror must then reflect that postponement. The only point of power is this breath. Right now, your identity is either aligned with the version of you who experiences coherence, or it is aligned with the version still searching. That alignment selects trajectory immediately. The field reorganizes around who you are being, not who you hope to become. This is why sudden shifts can occur without warning. A realization lands. A perception changes. And life reorganizes quickly. It is not because the future finally arrived. It is because identity shifted in the present. The future is probability. Identity is selector. Time is the interface through which selection appears to unfold. When you understand this, you stop chasing outcomes across months and years. You stop measuring progress by external milestones. You begin calibrating state in this moment. Because this moment contains every trajectory. There is no delay in creation. only delay in recognition. You are not building a better future. You are choosing from existing possibilities through the frequency you stabilize now. The moment your internal baseline matches the version of you who experiences synchronic flow, that trajectory becomes accessible. This does not require force. It requires awareness. Each time you return to presence instead of projecting forward, you collapse unnecessary timelines. Each time you stabilize certainty instead of waiting for proof, you select a different path. Linear time is useful for navigation. It is not the source of creation. The source is always here. And when you stop waiting for the future to change, and instead refine who you are being in this instant, you discover that synchronicity does not need time to arrive. It needs alignment. Now. At some point, the language of manifestation became distorted. You were told that you attract what you want. That if you focus hard enough, feel intensely enough, visualize clearly enough, you will pull experiences toward you like a magnet drawing metal. But attraction implies distance. It implies that what you desire is somewhere else, separate from you, waiting to be pulled across space. It assumes separation as the starting point. And separation reinforces longing. You do not attract your reality. You select it. Selection is not force. It is resonance. Imagine reality as a vast spectrum of already existing frequencies. Within that spectrum are countless versions of circumstances, encounters, conversations, and opportunities. They are not created from nothing. They are accessed through alignment. Resonance is tuning. When a radio dial aligns with a certain frequency, a specific station becomes audible. The station was always broadcasting. The signal was always present. The dial did not attract the music. It selected the frequency that matched. Your identity functions the same way. The version of reality you experience is the one that resonates with your stabilized state. When your internal coherence matches a certain pattern, that pattern becomes visible. Synchronicity is not something being sent to you from outside. It is confirmation that you have tuned correctly. This is why trying to attract often feels exhausting. You are attempting to pull what already exists instead of adjusting the dial. Selection requires stillness. It requires clarity of identity rather than intensity of desire. It requires consistency rather than spikes of motivation. When your state becomes stable, the resonance strengthens. When the resonance strengthens, the matching reality becomes accessible. Synchronicity is the echo of resonance. When conversations align unexpectedly, when timing feels precise, when opportunities unfold naturally, it is not because the universe delivered something new. It is because your frequency matched what was already available. You are not summoning experiences into existence. You are aligning with the ones that reflect you. This shifts everything. You stop asking how do I make this happen and begin asking what state am I stabilizing. You stop trying to pull outcomes closer and instead refine who you are being. Because the mirror does not respond to effort. It responds to match. When the match is clean, synchronicity appears seamless. When the match is unstable, the reflection flickers. You do not need to increase force. You need to refine resonance. And resonance is subtle. It is not dramatic emotion or exaggerated belief. It is quiet congruence. It is when your thoughts, posture, expectations, and internal narrative agree. The moment they agree, the dial locks in. Synchronicity then becomes confirmation that selection has occurred. Not as proof you did something extraordinary, but as evidence that coherence is active. You were never attracting from absence. You were always selecting from possibility. The difference is power. Not by pulling, but by tuning. Contrast is not a mistake in the system. It is part of the refinement process. You were never meant to move through life in uninterrupted expansion. Without contrast, clarity would never sharpen. Without friction, preference would remain vague. Without moments of contraction, you would not recognize alignment when it appears. Contrast refines the timeline. When something does not unfold as expected, when an opportunity dissolves, when a connection fades, the instinct is to interpret it as failure. But failure is a story layered on top of feedback. The event itself is neutral. The contraction you feel is guidance. Contraction is not punishment. It is the signal that something in your current direction does not match your deeper coherence. It reveals what is not aligned so that what is aligned becomes unmistakable. Without that signal, you would continue down trajectories that dilute your clarity. Every disappointment clarifies desire. Every obstacle sharpens focus. Every delay reveals timing. Contrast forces precision. It strips away vague wanting and replaces it with defined knowing. When you feel the discomfort of misalignment, you are not being pushed backward. You are being narrowed into a clearer path. The mistake is resisting contrast. When you fight it, you extend it. When you label it as wrong, you amplify the tension. But when you observe it as refinement, something shifts. The contraction softens. The lesson becomes visible. The trajectory adjusts. Acceptance is not resignation. It is calibration. To accept contrast is to extract the information it contains. What did this reveal about what matters? What did this clarify about what does not? What became obvious that was previously hidden? Every contraction carries data. And data refines direction. Synchronicity does not only appear as pleasant convergence. It also appears as redirection. A missed opportunity may be protection. A closed door may be compression before expansion. A disruption may be realignment. When you stop interpreting contrast as obstruction and begin seeing it as clarification, adversity becomes purposeful. Not because it was designed to test you, but because it reveals alignment more clearly than comfort ever could. The field does not punish. It reflects refinement. If a path contracts repeatedly, it is not a sign to push harder. It is an invitation to adjust. If something feels consistently heavy, it is not proof that you must endure more. It is feedback that resonance is off. Contrast is not there to discourage you. It is there to sharpen you. Without it, you would drift. With it, you refine. The moment you allow contrast to serve clarity instead of resisting it as failure, your trajectory stabilizes faster. You stop wasting energy fighting feedback. You begin integrating it. And in that integration, synchronicity strengthens. Not because life becomes easier, but because alignment becomes clearer. Contrast was never the enemy. It was always the sculptor. Up until now, you have understood the principles. Now we move into embodiment. Because knowledge about synchronicity changes nothing unless the identity behind it shifts. And the greatest barrier to that shift is control. Control feels responsible. It feels intelligent. It feels like protection. But beneath control is fear. Fear that without constant management, everything will fall apart. Fear that if you loosen your grip, reality will move in the wrong direction. Control is a fear-based identity attempting to stabilize safety through force. When you try to control outcomes, you are operating from the assumption that you are separate from the intelligence organizing your life. You place yourself against reality instead of within it. You tighten. You calculate. You monitor. And that tightening becomes your baseline state. The paradox is subtle. The more you attempt to secure results, the more you signal distrust in the process that is already responsive to you. That distrust fragments coherence. It divides your energy between what is and what must change. Surrender is not passivity. It is alignment. To surrender is to release the illusion that you must micromanage every detail. It is to recognize that there is an organizing intelligence operating through the same field you inhabit. When you surrender, you are not giving up responsibility. You are giving up resistance. Allowing is active coherence. It requires awareness. It requires discipline. It requires the strength to remain steady when circumstances are not yet reflecting your preference. Allowing says, I will remain aligned with who I choose to be regardless of temporary appearances. This is power without tension. Control attempts to manipulate the reflection. Allowing refines the source. Control reacts to circumstances. Allowing stabilizes identity and lets circumstances reorganize naturally. When you dissolve control, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system softens. Your decisions become cleaner. Your actions become precise instead of frantic. You begin moving from clarity instead of compulsion. This does not mean you stop acting. It means your action is no longer driven by fear of loss. It becomes guided by inner steadiness. You respond instead of react. You move instead of push. The illusion of control is rooted in the belief that if you do not interfere, nothing will happen. But interference is often what slows movement. When you stop gripping the timeline, you remove distortion from the signal. Coherence strengthens. Surrender is trust embodied. Not blind trust in an external force, but recognition that the same consciousness shaping reality is operating through you. You are not relinquishing power. You are aligning with it. When you release the need to control, you step into partnership with the field instead of opposition. You no longer try to dominate the mirror. You become steady enough for it to reflect clearly. And in that steadiness, synchronicity flows without strain. Not because you forced it. Because you stopped resisting it. Coherence is the state where nothing inside you is in conflict. Your thoughts are not arguing with your emotions. Your desires are not battling your fears. Your words are not contradicting your internal assumptions. There is a unified signal moving through your system. That unity is coherence. Coherence is heart and mind aligned in the same direction. It is emotional stability that does not swing with every external fluctuation. It is a steady baseline that says this is who I am, regardless of temporary appearances. When coherence stabilizes, something powerful happens. Your signal strengthens. A weak signal produces scattered reflections. A strong signal produces consistent patterns. Coherence is strength without force. It is clarity without tension. It is steadiness without rigidity. This is the state that activates what people call miracles. A miracle is not a suspension of natural law. It is a visible manifestation of invisible coherence. When your internal frequency becomes stable enough, the probability field reorganizes in ways that appear extraordinary from the outside. But from within coherence, they feel natural. Magnetism is not something you generate by trying to be attractive. It is a byproduct of alignment. When your internal state is unified, others feel it. Opportunities respond to it. Timing adjusts around it. Not because you demanded it, but because your frequency is consistent. Consistency is persuasive. Reality responds to stability. When you shift identities daily, oscillate between certainty and doubt, and fluctuate between confidence and fear, the reflection flickers. When your state becomes calm and anchored, the reflection stabilizes. Miracles are predictable patterns emerging from stabilized frequency. They seem unpredictable only because most people do not maintain coherence long enough to see the pattern form. They move in and out of alignment, then call the brief moments of reflection luck. There is nothing random about coherence. When your heart is calm and your mind is clear, your nervous system regulates. When your nervous system regulates, your perception sharpens. When perception sharpens, you recognize opportunities that were always present. You act from clarity instead of compulsion. That clarity compounds. And what looks like a miracle from the outside is often simply coherence sustained over time. You do not need to chase extraordinary outcomes. You need to stabilize ordinary alignment. The more internally unified you become, the less external friction you encounter. Decisions simplify. Interactions smooth. Timing refines. You move with precision instead of effort. Coherence is not dramatic. It is quiet. It feels grounded. It feels certain without needing validation. And once it becomes your baseline, synchronicity stops surprising you. It becomes the rhythm of your life. Not because you asked for miracles, but because you became coherent enough to allow them. You have been taught that change requires effort. That transformation demands struggle. That becoming someone new takes time, repetition, and force. But the deepest shifts do not happen through effort. They happen through recognition. Recognition is the moment a truth lands so clearly that you cannot unsee it. It is not gradual. It is not constructed. It is instantaneous. And in that instant, identity reorganizes. You do not become something new through effort. You remember something that was always available. When recognition occurs, the internal narrative changes immediately. The old assumption dissolves. The new perspective stabilizes. And because identity has shifted, the reflection must adjust. This is how timelines collapse. Not through pushing. Not through waiting. Through seeing. Imagine believing your entire life that you are limited. Then one day you recognize that limitation was an inherited story, not a fact. The moment you truly see that, something irreversible happens. You cannot go back to believing it in the same way. Your decisions shift. Your posture shifts. Your perception shifts. And reality reorganizes around that new baseline. Recognition is the shift. Effort attempts to move reality while protecting the same identity. Recognition dissolves the identity that required effort in the first place. The struggle was never with circumstances. It was with perception. When awareness expands, identity updates. When identity updates, selection changes. And when selection changes, experience follows. There is no delay between recognition and internal shift. The only delay is in how long you resist seeing. You do not need to force a new reality into existence. You need to see clearly enough that the old one loses its grip. Awareness rewrites the script quietly, cleanly, completely. This is why some transformations feel sudden. Someone hears a sentence at the right moment. They understand something deeply. And their life begins moving differently almost immediately. From the outside, it looks dramatic. From the inside, it feels obvious. Recognition does not require effort. It requires openness. You are not climbing toward a better version of yourself. You are uncovering it. The moment you recognize that you are not separate from the field responding to you, your posture changes. You stop pleading with reality. You begin standing within it. And in that standing, the mirror adjusts. You do not need to struggle into synchronicity. You need to recognize that it has always been responding. The instant that recognition stabilizes, your identity shifts from seeker to participant. No ritual required. No force applied. Just clarity. And clarity reorganizes everything. We now arrive at the final elevation of identity. Not improvement. Not refinement. Revelation. Because everything you have understood so far rests on a deeper truth that dissolves the last illusion of separation. You are not in reality. You are reality. From the beginning, you were conditioned to believe you are a small consciousness moving through a vast external world. A person navigating circumstances. A mind reacting to events. But that model places you inside something larger, as if you are subject to forces outside yourself. Consciousness is not inside reality. Consciousness is the foundation of it. What you call the world is experience arising within awareness. What you call circumstance is perception organizing itself around a point of view. The individual is not separate from the field. The individual is the field, focused. You are not a fragment trying to influence the whole. You are the whole expressing itself as a perspective. This dissolves struggle immediately. If consciousness is primary, then the events you experience are not happening to you. They are happening within the same awareness that you are. Synchronicity is no longer an external sign sent by a distant intelligence. It is self-communication. It is consciousness arranging reflections to guide its own expansion. When you experience a meaningful convergence, it is not the universe reaching toward you. It is you recognizing yourself through pattern. When timing feels precise, it is not fate intervening. It is coherence revealing itself. The observer and the observed are not separate. The mirror and the face are not separate. The field and the identity selecting from it are not separate. The illusion of separation created the need to control. It created the urge to attract. It created the belief in waiting. But when you recognize that you are not inside a universe attempting to interpret signs, but the awareness through which the universe appears, something settles. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop asking for permission. You stop trying to earn alignment. You begin to move as consciousness expressing itself deliberately. This is not grandiosity. It is simplicity. You are not more powerful than reality. You are not more special than others. You are the same consciousness appearing through a unique lens. Every being is. Every perspective is. Synchronicity then becomes the natural rhythm of self-recognition. Life responds because life is you in motion. Guidance appears because guidance is awareness refining itself. There is no external authority distributing signs. There is only consciousness arranging experience to remember itself more fully. When you realize you are not in reality but are reality expressing as perspective, fear softens. Urgency dissolves. The need to prove fades. There is nothing outside you withholding alignment. There is only awareness selecting expression. And you are that awareness. Living in synchronistic flow is not dramatic. It is not a constant stream of spectacular signs or overwhelming revelations. It is subtle. It is steady. It feels normal. Continuous flow begins with calm presence as your baseline. Not occasional calm. Not calm only when things go well. A stable inner steadiness that does not rise and fall with every external shift. When presence becomes your default rather than your emergency response, synchronicity stops feeling rare. Calm is coherence in motion. When you wake up and return to stillness before reaching for stimulation, you strengthen that baseline. When you pause before reacting, you preserve clarity. When you choose response over impulse, you refine alignment. These are not grand spiritual practices. They are daily calibrations. Emotional calibration becomes a lifestyle. Not obsessive monitoring. Not constant analysis. Simple awareness. You notice when something expands you. You notice when something contracts you. And you adjust gently. You gravitate toward what feels clean. You release what feels heavy. Over time, this becomes natural. You stop chasing signs because you no longer need confirmation. You trust your internal guidance system. You recognize alignment through how it feels rather than waiting for external proof. Flow replaces force. Instead of pushing outcomes, you move with the current that already exists. Opportunities feel less like battles and more like invitations. Conversations feel less like negotiations and more like exchanges. Timing feels less like pressure and more like unfolding. Flow is not laziness. It is intelligent movement. You still take action. You still make decisions. But the energy behind them changes. There is less strain. Less urgency. Less need to control every variable. You move when clarity is present. You pause when it is not. That rhythm preserves coherence. Synchronicity becomes continuous when your internal state is continuous. If you fluctuate wildly between trust and doubt, between steadiness and panic, the reflection will fluctuate as well. But when your baseline is grounded, the patterns that emerge become more predictable. Not because you control them, but because you remain aligned. Living in flow does not mean life becomes free of challenge. It means challenges no longer destabilize you. You interpret them as adjustments rather than threats. You respond instead of react. You refine instead of resist. The most synchronistic lives are not chaotic with signs. They are calm with clarity. You wake up without anxiety about what must happen. You move through the day without gripping outcomes. You sleep without replaying what went wrong. This steadiness compounds. And from that steadiness, meaningful alignment appears naturally. Meetings occur at the right moment. Ideas surface when needed. Solutions reveal themselves without force. Flow is not something you enter occasionally. It is what remains when resistance fades. And when calm presence becomes who you are rather than something you practice, synchronicity becomes the quiet rhythm of your everyday life. Nothing external needed to change. Not the timing. Not the people around you. Not the opportunities. Not the world itself. The only shift that was ever required was stabilization of identity. You were never waiting for reality to improve. You were refining the lens through which it appears. Every concept you have absorbed leads to this simplicity. The mirror was always functioning. The field was always responsive. The timelines were always available. The only variable was who you believed yourself to be within the system. When identity stabilizes, selection becomes effortless. You do not wake up one day in a different universe. You wake up with a different baseline. That baseline subtly adjusts your decisions, your reactions, your posture, your expectations. And those adjustments reorganize experience. The change is internal first. Always. You may not see dramatic evidence immediately. But the moment your identity shifts from seeker to selector, from controller to participant, from separate to integrated, the trajectory alters. The path bends quietly. You are already selecting. Right now, as you listen to these words, your awareness is stabilizing around a different understanding of yourself. That understanding carries a frequency. That frequency selects experience. Not later. Now. You do not need to earn alignment. You do not need to prove worthiness. You do not need to perfect your thoughts. The only requirement is coherence. And coherence is simply the absence of internal contradiction. When you stop identifying as someone trying to reshape reality and begin recognizing yourself as consciousness expressing through it, struggle loses relevance. You move with steadiness. You act with clarity. You release urgency. The external world begins to reflect that steadiness. Synchronicity is not the reward for spiritual effort. It is the natural byproduct of stabilized being. When your internal state is clear, the mirror is clear. When your internal state is scattered, the mirror reflects scatter. The shift was never outside you. You were never powerless. You were never behind. You were never waiting for permission from the universe. You were calibrating your own identity within it. And now you see it. You see that the only change required was recognition. Recognition that you are not at the effect of life. Recognition that your state selects trajectory. Recognition that calm presence reorganizes circumstances without force. From here forward, you do not chase synchronicity. You live coherently and let it appear. You do not attempt to manufacture alignment. You stabilize it. You do not wait for confirmation. You move with quiet certainty. You are already in motion. The timeline is already responding. The shift has already begun. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.